Well, if you want to, go ahead and have your Bible out and be in Acts chapter 17. Compared to a lot of the other lessons I've been doing in this series, we've been bouncing around from like place to place. We're going to be able to camp out this morning in just one chapter. So Acts chapter 17. I picked this lesson for the Bible class time. And as you can probably tell from like the PowerPoint, that doesn't look like all the other PowerPoint slides. So this is kind of taking a little bit of a break, a little bit of a detour from the God in your pocket, but it's going to go hand in hand with the morning's lesson after this. So that's kind of why I chose this. But also, I chose this lesson because so many of you, when you, like the first question is, where are you from? And it's like Salt Lake City, Utah, and everyone has like 50 questions about what is it like living in Utah. And so I found it helpful to just, let's have a Bible class where we can bring that up organically. You can ask questions. But in turn, what we're going to be doing is looking at Paul's time in the city of Athens. What was it like when he visits this city? What does he see? How does he react? What does he do? And so I'm going to talk about how evangelism has changed since I've moved to Utah, how I approach reaching the lost. But ultimately what I want you to do is be thinking about what are some things that you see when you look out in the different suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri? What are the type of people you interact with? How can you be like Paul in reaching the lost, being more effective in that? And so let me throw this out there. Where I live in Utah, I say Salt Lake City, right? But it's not exactly Salt Lake City. I live about 25 miles north of Salt Lake in a city called Syracuse. And it's a lot like driving through St. Louis, I've noticed. It's just like, I feel like from the drive from the Kuipers to this building, I pass through like 20 different cities. It's a lot like that in Utah. You're just constantly going through city to city. And I don't know the exact population of our county that, would say that they are LDS, members of the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, Mormons, as people commonly refer to them of. It's probably the 2020 census people identified, I think it was 78%. So just to kind of give you a little bit of what it's like living in Utah, the whole state, it's roughly about 50%. But if you go further south to a county like Utah County, they're like 95% Mormon. And so it's, in a lot of ways, people are like, it must be like a foreign evangelism field. And it's like, yes, but no. And so I want to talk with you more about that throughout this lesson. So this is something I'm really passionate about. I told Ryan, I was like, can I sneak this in there? And he was like, absolutely, go for it. So I do whatever I can to throw lessons like this in on evangelism. So it's something I'm just so passionate about and hope you'll be able to learn from this study. But in Acts chapter 17, we're going to get some text in front of us, and then we'll chat about it. In verse 15 of Acts chapter 17, we see that Paul finds himself in the city of Athens because there have been some just angry Jews, right, that are chasing him and running him out city after city. And so they ran him out of Thessalonica and then Berea. And now he is in the city of Athens waiting for his traveling companions to join him. And you might think after you've been basically like chased for your life, that when you get to a big city, I mean, Athens is not like a small city at this time. It's one of the biggest cities in the world, that you might just kind of lay low, right? Sit back, not really get out there, don't want to cause any trouble. Not Paul. He can't do that. And the verses explain to us why that is the case. So let's read Acts 17, verses 16 through 21. And get into this text. It says, "Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with them. And some said, 'What does this babbler wish to say?' Others said, 'He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection.' And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, 'May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean.'" Verse 21 is important. It says, "Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new." And so let's kind of like work through this text a little bit, and this is very much meant to be conversational, so I'll start asking you some questions, and if you have thoughts or questions, feel free to throw your hand up. That's totally fine. But notice in Paul's time in Athens, kind of what did he see? What did Paul see when he entered the city? We've talked about this actually in a previous lesson on Friday night. Something that strikes Paul right away is that there are idols, right? There are idols everywhere, and that's in verse 16. Paul grew up a Hebrew of Hebrews, right? He grew up a Jew. He knew how God felt about idolatry. So that's no surprise to us. We understand that. But I hope that we can appreciate that this really speaks to the culture of Athens at this time. Anybody know one of the main things that like Athens and especially Greece was known for in like first century times? It's kind of a broad question, but we'll see what you guys know. Anybody know what they were known for during this time? It was nicknamed like the capital of philosophy. They esteemed themselves, they prided themselves on their enlightenment, right? Their philosophical way of thinking. And that's like verse 21. It pictures like a book club without a book, right? Just like talking about things that are new, discussing new ideas, new approaches, new outlooks on life. Petronius was a Roman writer during the time of Nero, and he said this about Athens. He said, it's easier to find a god than a man in Athens. And so that's probably a little bit jarring for us to imagine walking in this city and just seeing idols, literal idols, right, everywhere. When some people come out to Utah, like my friends and family come out, they kind of have a little bit of this reaction. There are wards, is what the LDS meeting places are called, not church buildings. They call them wards. I drive about 5 miles to where our building is, and I pass 13 wards in 5 miles. And so they're just everywhere. And there are temples everywhere with Moroni on the top. And you can't miss it. You're like, what's going on? Right? You see it everywhere. And so that's a little bit of the parallel with what Paul is seeing, that there are idols everywhere. But what did Paul feel then? He sees these idols all around him, and what's his reaction? Not asking that rhetorically. What did he feel? What did he feel? Yeah, provoked. Most translations will use the word provoked. Have you ever been provoked before? Right? Yeah, some of you don't look at your spouse sitting next to you or anything like that. Too late. Some of you just looked over. The same word actually appears in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 5 in the way that love does not behave, right? Love is not irritable. And so the same Greek word that's used here for being provoked. He's irritated by what he sees. Now understand, I'm not saying that Paul is sinning here, right? And that he's expressing love and his feelings in like a sinful way. Because the same idea, Ephesians 4 and verse 26. It's possible to be angry, right? To be irritated, to be annoyed, to be provoked, but not sin. And so I think that definitely there's a godly way to go about this. But he is distressed. He's urged on by what he sees, and he cannot stay silent because he knows how God feels about idolatry, and so it bothers him. You can go ahead and start thinking about this because I'm going to ask you, we're going to kind of go through Acts 17 from Paul's perspective and then put ourselves in his shoes. So I'm kind of going through quickly the text and from Paul's perspective, but already be thinking like, how do you feel by what you see around you? What do you feel? What's kind of your gut reaction living in St. Louis, Missouri? And what you see, what you interact with on a daily basis. Be giving that some thought. But we see not only what Paul saw and what Paul felt, but then also what Paul did. That resulted in action in his life. And how would you summarize that? What does Paul go and do based off of he sees these idols everywhere, he's provoked by it, and so what does he do? What does he go and do? He reasons with them. Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second. What does it mean to reason with someone? What does it mean to reason with someone? Or better yet, you can just jump to the application of that. Like, what does that look like, reasoning with someone? Yes, sir.
I was thinking about it in the way of, he has every authority even to condemn them, but instead he's provoked to an action that's talking to them. It's just a conversation that seems to reason with them, not in a way to put them down in any way really, but to draw out what they're thinking, what their purpose is, and then draw it alongside what he understands.
Okay.
See what they think about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah. Jake.
When we talked about the history of Athens being the kind of center of philosophy, something that's common in their culture is debate and rhetoric. So I like how he takes the current situation and goes at it in their field. Maybe they would have a respectful rhetorical conversation.
Yeah. Hopefully respectful, yeah. We maybe struggle with that more today in how we reason with people. We start reasoning and then it ends with arguing. And in fact, here's kind of a funny connection to that. That same Greek word appears in Mark chapter 9 and verse 34. Of the disciples of Jesus, they were reasoning together, except most of our translations will put the word argue in there. Because you know what they are arguing or reasoning about? Which one of them was the greatest? And so it kind of changes your perspective maybe on how you view those interactions. Because I always think about them bickering like kids, no, I'm the greatest. No, I'm the greatest. But maybe from this perspective of how they're actually reasoning together, maybe they're making appeals like, Jesus called me before he called you. Therefore, I am greater. And they totally miss the point. Jesus rebukes them for that. But same word is used there. But kind of a follow-up to this, how do you know if you're good at reasoning with people? What would that look like? How do you know that you're effective, that you're successful at being able to reason and have these type of conversations with people? What does that look like in maybe a tangible way? And you don't have to be well, I'm really good at it, so this is what happens. Maybe think of someone in your life that you think is really good at reasoning with others. Maybe you've seen this firsthand. What's kind of the fruit of that? Yes, sir. Empathy? Yeah, that's a big part. Yeah.
I would say I would lead with the situation. If I was the one receiving, I would say I would lead with the situation thinking, okay, I'll give that some thought.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What else would you guys add to that? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe they start to see things how you're seeing them a little bit and understand more.
Yeah. Understanding would hopefully be an outcome of this, right? That they're not feeling attacked by what you're saying, but they're able to be okay, I may not agree with it, but I can at least understand. I see the arguments, I see the logic, I see how you got to where you are. And now I got to chew on it, right? Now I got to really think about this more.
It goes along with what was just said, but I think listening, not being the only one doing the talking, is to appreciate and understand the other side of the perspective.
Absolutely. But we struggle with listening, don't we? It's hard to be truly an active and a good listener. Because so many times when someone is saying, especially, when it's spiritual matters, things that really matter, maybe it's something you're really passionate about, and all of a sudden someone is making a claim that contradicts Scripture in the way that you understand it, and all of a sudden they're saying that, and you hear them, and you're just thinking oh, I got a zinger, this is coming, they're not ready for this, and you're just waiting for them to take a breath, and then you come in with that, and maybe you've missed the heart of what they were saying, that they're not trying to make an attack. Maybe they're just trying to present a defense. And I think this is where sometimes maybe we struggle as Christians. We're well, we have to be bold. We have to stand up for truth. We can do that and still reason with them. In fact, this word reason appears 13 times in the New Testament. 10 of the 13 times it appears in the book of Acts, and every time it is what Paul did. It is Paul's bread and butter. It is how he reached out with people. Why he was an effective evangelist. He would reason with them. Yeah, Luke.
I think something else Paul did was he started where they were, kind of what Jake was saying, but so he found an altar that said to an unknown God and started with what was already one of their concepts and corrected it and went off of that launching point.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
he went to the place where people would be receptive to new ideas and thinking. I think
yeah, a meeting place to discuss like just new things. And oftentimes, kind of Paul's pattern in the book of Acts, he'll go and reason with people, and he always starts in the synagogue. He'll start with the Jewish people, and typically they're like, we don't want this. And so he'll go out, find the Gentiles, and be like, you guys will listen here. This is what I'm saying. And how do you know Paul was effective? You can infer that from the text, right? Because he got their attention. Some people are calling him a babbler. Some are calling him a preacher of foreign divinities. But he gets the invitation, right? In verse 19, he gets the invite to go to the Areopagus. And can you expound on this a little bit more? We're hearing new things. We like new things. So can you explain this? And what is that new thing that he was teaching? Teaching about Jesus and the resurrection. And you don't hear that every day in, right, Greek culture, and this idea of immortality, being like a God and living forever, and yet the God that you're proclaiming died on a cross. You can understand why that would be kind of very enticing for them. And so that leads into kind of what I was just saying. What Paul saw, what he felt, what he did, and ultimately what he said. So now being provoked by what he saw, he reasoned with them. He reasoned about, well, verse 18, he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. What are your guys' thoughts on this? Do you think that preaching Jesus and the resurrection would be a very strange thing in our society today? I'll put myself in St. Louis, Missouri. Is that a strange thing to a lot of people's ears here, would you say? That's a tough question, because some of you are like, no, and some of you are like, maybe. I would argue that it is kind of a strange thing, maybe, because a lot of people, we like to just talk about Jesus' ministry, but we don't like to talk about the implications of Jesus' resurrection, because if he is raised from the dead, then that means that he was everything he claimed to be. That means that, where is he today then? He is in heaven, he is reigning, he is Lord of lords and King of kings. But that also infers that he's going to come back someday. He's going to come back in judgment. And so I think sometimes what people are familiar with as the resurrection is, next week. It's maybe limited to like an Easter Sunday type sermon that Jesus, the tomb was empty, praise the Lord. And yes, but that's the incomplete message of the resurrection. There's so much more that implies. And you go through the book of Acts, you see other sermons that not just Paul, but like Peter and John would preach. There's always the anticipation when you preach the resurrection that Jesus is going to return. That there's urgency that should create with this message. And so if we just, always summarize it as the death, burial, and resurrection, don't end the story there, right? The ascension is a key part of that too, and where Jesus is and what is going to come. And that is essentially how this sermon in Acts chapter 17 will end if you drop down verse 30 and 31 and what he goes on to say. And so here's kind of the challenge for us then. Acts chapter 17 is such an impactful chapter when I think about it in my life and sharing the gospel with others, but it's also a challenging chapter. It's a convicting chapter because maybe I don't speak like Paul spoke because I don't feel as Paul felt. Maybe I don't feel as Paul felt because I don't see the loss like Paul saw the loss. And so do you kind of see how that train of thought goes? And so I hope this causes us to look inward because I would argue to you that Acts chapter 17, where you guys live in St. Louis, it's true in Utah as well, Salt Lake City. We all live in a city like Athens, similar to Athens in many, many ways. And so how does the environment that you live in and what you see on a daily basis, how does that affect how you reach the lost, how you engage with them, how you interact with them? And so really what we're going to do is kind of end by asking 4 questions based off of Acts chapter 17. And I'm hopeful that we can get into some good discussion on this. And real fast before I just get going, class ends at 9:45, right? 9:45, okay. Just didn't want to hold you guys hostage here and kids are running in. All right, so first let's start here. What do you see? Now I'm not going to ask that question even rhetorically. What sticks out to you, especially some of you if you're more new to the St. Louis area and you moved here from someplace else? What sticks out to you when maybe you moved here or as you've grown up here and lived in this area? What do you see when you look out, living near Ellisville, Missouri? Yeah, Rob?
So we moved here 3 years ago or so, and from Northeast Oklahoma, and there was a stark difference that in Northeast Oklahoma, the predominant denomination is probably Baptist. And so for many years, I found myself having discussions about faith only and necessity of baptism, and a whole kind of a host of issues and topics that come up when you're talking to people of that background. We moved here, and it is very different. There's a huge Catholic influence in the St. Louis area, and I don't know that I was immediately prepared for that, and I had to kind of, to your point, I think, adjust the way I would initiate conversations with that in mind. Different background, different things to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And that was more my experiences were kind of similar to you. Being in Florida, I would say it was kind of a melting pot in a lot of ways, but most of the people I would talk with were probably Baptist. So it was a lot of like Calvinism. I felt like I was getting in those discussions. But I noticed as you said the word Catholic, there were a lot of people that it was like, yes, like you were getting some silent amens on that. But what else kind of sticks out to you guys? What do you see living here? Because I didn't get time to do my like deep Google searches on demographics of Ellisville and breaking it down statistically. So I need you guys. Yeah, Jason.
One of the things I think, PJ, maybe you'll want to talk about is, regardless, coming from Utah, there's this social aspect, that there's this commonality in the religious beliefs and how it impacts how people live their lives and how we interact with those people. But I think there's a commonality here because of the Catholic, that dominant presence culturally. It seems like everything kind of revolves around that ecosystem of how they work and function within that belief system, right? And I think there's some commonalities there. Like, we have that in Utah. Like, we were joking about if you want to go grocery shopping, you do it on Sunday because there's no one out on Sunday. Like, there are no sports on Sundays, period. So there's things that were beneficial. Like, we didn't have to worry about doing sports on Sundays, but here, the Catholic belief, they do things on Saturday. So they like to go play sports on Sunday. But I think it's kind of built into that social aspect, that cultural aspect, where there's a lot of people who claim to be religious, but are probably just doing it because they don't want to be excluded from that culture. And so I think there's some commonalities that I've seen between the two.
Yeah. Definitely, I appreciate that. So just know if you have more questions about life in Utah, just talk to the Kuipers. They can definitely kind of go further into what I'm kind of bringing up this morning. But yeah, anything else kind of strike you here in Ellisville? Yes, sir.
I was going to say St. Louis is known as the gateway to the West, so really it's a mixture here. There's a strong Catholic, but there's also a Jewish presence and a Protestant presence. It's kind of a melting pot for American culture.
Yeah. And I know with some of these questions, right, it's going to be heavily like experience-based and where you live, and so we are speaking rather maybe stereotypically in some ways, so acknowledge that. But yeah, that's helpful. Yes, ma'am, was your hand up?
I was going to say, this has been here for a while, but if you go down, so this big road out here is Manchester Road, since you're from out of town. And if you go down just about 5 miles and you turn on this one road called Weidman Road, you will see not only a Catholic church, but you will see a Muslim mosque, and you also see a Hindu temple. And they're all within probably a mile or less of each other.
Okay.
And so to have that, there's some people that love it, other people, because, that's, multicultural, culturalism and all of that nonsense. And then you have others where, to me it's a bit disturbing.
Well, I think, every place in the world, right, is going to have a melting pot of sorts. And so I hope one of the things that you guys are able to see from like the answers, and I know we could go around the room and everyone would be able to share different things that stick out to you. But I hope something that you see is that there are souls that are lost. There are people that are lost, and maybe we go blind to that sometimes. We just, I mentioned it yesterday in one of the sermons that So many times it's easy, especially like as a preacher, and I'm not condemning Ryan at all for doing this. I can't speak for him. I'm speaking for myself. It's easy to like preach the lessons that talk about like the world is wicked. This is what the world is doing. And so many times we fail to like look inwardly. It's easy to talk about like how lost people are, but do we see that? Or have we maybe gone blind to it? Jesus is so helpful, obviously. Understatement of the year. But in Matthew chapter 9, remember kind of how did he see people in his life? Matthew 9, 35 through 36 says, "And Jesus went throughout all the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd." So when Jesus looked out, that's what he saw. He saw people that were wandering, people that were lost, people that needed saving. And so until we start to see the lost in that way, we're probably not going to be motivated to do much else about that. And that's kind of where we're going with the next couple questions we'll ask. But I think there are signs around us. Doesn't matter. Everywhere I've gone, everywhere I've lived, I've noticed this. There are clear demonstrations that people are religious, that people are spiritual. But maybe they fit a little bit of what Romans 10 and verse 2 says, for I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. And that's going to vary depending on where we live. But I hope we see that there are people who are zealous for God and doing what they think is right. Maybe what they've grown up being taught. But maybe not according to the pattern laid out in the Word of God. I think this is important to throw out, too, with what we were talking about earlier when it comes to reasoning with people. We need to be very careful that we never present ourselves like we're the only ones who have the right answers, that we know everything. Let's not get it confused, right? The church truth does not come from us, right? We uphold truth. We follow truth. But we are not the originators of truth. And sometimes we can maybe be guilty of acting with that. And so we need to be able to call out differences when it doesn't match the Word of God. But we need to kind of walk a little bit of a fine line there. Because if you start to try and reason with someone, but it's a one-way conversation, that's not really reasoning. That's not going to end very well for you in that conversation. But some of you have asked, what do I see in Syracuse, Utah? They're building a temple in Syracuse. I think there's getting over 200 temples right now throughout the world, the LDS Church. And it's kind of cool when they open up a temple, Gentiles, right, outsiders of the LDS Church are allowed to go in and view the temple. And I've had the opportunity to do that with another temple that opened up nearby, and we were actually invited by some of the kind of higher ups in the LDS Church to go and tour that temple. And so we kind of got they called it the VIP tour, so that always feels cool. But I opened it up to our congregation, so we had 60 people from our group go through, and they regretted that because everyone's like, well, what about that? What does that mean? Why is that here? Why do we need this? And they're just like, just walk through and appreciate it. And it's a beautiful building. It is so ornate. You walk through, and you get to the top floor, and on the top floor is the celestial room. And it's said that, in the celestial room, that when you go in there, that's the closest that we can get on earth to feeling God's presence. And so when you go in there, you're asked not to speak or talk. And I was so panicked. I was thankful my wife wasn't able to come with our son Russell, because they're like, and the kids need to stay silent too. And they're like, most of the kids can feel the Spirit too, so it's not too much of a problem. Like, the Lord will guide him through it. And I was like, not my son. Like, he's gonna be running around the celestial room. But you go in there, and I was able to go in. I did this tour 4 times when they had it open. I was kept going through. And you go in there, and there are people on their knees crying in that room. And it's such a unique experience. I knew nothing about the LDS faith before moving to Utah, so I've been kind of learning on the fly over these past 5 years. But that's something that I see on a daily basis. I'm reminded that there are people that are religious, and I'll be blunt, they probably put us to shame when it comes to their devotion to their faith in so many ways. They hold it arguably, maybe even a higher moral standard than many of us, and they are devoted to that. in a way that shames many Christians. And so there's a lot that I learned from my LDS neighbors. Do I think that they are preaching and teaching truth? Not at all. 2 Corinthians 11 warns about when you follow another Jesus after another spirit and another gospel, you're going to be led away from what is truth. And I firmly believe that they are following another Jesus. But I have to remind myself of this point. What do I see when I look out around me? I see people that are lost. And I hope that you see that here in Ellisville, Missouri as well. But that kind of leads into the second point. Okay, yeah, we see things around us all the time, but ask yourself, well, how does that cause you to feel? We talked about Paul, right? He couldn't help but be bothered and provoked by what he saw, the idolatry that's all around him. And he used his emotion to push him in the right direction. But here's kind of a fact of life. You won't be motivated to act until your emotion is involved, right? Think about it. I'm laughing right now. We have a ton of like Planet Fitnesses and stuff where I live, and like January and February, they all seem to plot with like Chick-fil-A, and so like trying to get the Chick-fil-A is the worst experience in January because everyone's going to the gym. But by this time of year, it's not a problem, right? The New Year's resolutions have died out because until you get like your emotion, until you get the will involved in it, you're not going to follow through. And so you can see all these things around us, but until we're bothered about it, that is really going to be something that leads us to action. I think about Psalm 119, verse 136. It says, my eyes shed streams of tears because people do not keep your law. And so if I'm serious in my faith and my discipleship and following the Lord, there should be a certain extent where I am bothered, I am provoked by what I see around me. Not just that people are practicing things that are wrong, but that I'm heartbroken by that. That I want to do something about that. That I want this person to be saved. We have a young lady who, I'll give you guys like the briefest version of it. I won't say her name because these are being recorded, I think. So she probably would be embarrassed. But she began dating one of our members. And she left the LDS church a few years ago, but wasn't sure what was truth. That was like her, like, I know truth is out there, but I have no idea where to start, where to look. She was dating this boy for a while, and it didn't work out. They broke up. She didn't feel like she could come back to our congregation because that was his church. And so she looked around and realized definitely not finding truth there, and would like question the pastors. And I loved hearing about this after the fact. She would go up and be like, where's that in the Bible? And so she came back, studied with her for like 6 months. She obeys the gospel. She ends up kind of reconnecting with her ex-boyfriend. They fall in love all over again, stronger this time, and they just got married last month. And so kind of like the happy ending, like 3 years in the making, right? All that coming together, and it was amazing. She cannot, like she wouldn't be able to sit through a lesson like this, I'll tell you that. Because she cannot help but like cry anytime she thinks about people that are lost. Like her whole family, everyone she grew up with, all of her friends are LDS or atheists, kind of the two camps. And I joke with her that she's like our second evangelist at the congregation because she goes out and she's like, I have a study with this person, will you come join me? And it's like, you already know the answer, like, yes. And she, I mean, to the point of tears on like a daily basis is crying over her friends and family that are lost. But you know what that means? Is she is one of our hardest workers for the Lord. And she, I mean, we're trying like keep fanning that flame within her. Because that leads to like the third question. Well, yes, what you can see the right things. Maybe you can even feel the right emotions. Maybe you're heartbroken. You're provoked. You're bothered by what you see about it. But maybe you're like, well, I'm not really confident. I'm not really good at talking with others, and so it kind of stalls out at like that intersection between like feeling and action. But we read through Acts chapter 17, and we see kind of the emotion of Paul, but we also see his work ethic, that he could have waited for his companions to join, right? He's just been chased out of Thessalonica and then Berea. But no, he sees this, and he can't sit back quietly. He has to go and get the word. And so many times, I think we view conversations on evangelism that it's always going to be like in somebody's home, or it's going to be like around a kitchen table and it's going to be a 60-minute conversation. Very rarely is that like the form of evangelism. Like that's my dream scenario, right? If I can get someone in my house around like the dinner table, like we're pretty close. Like that's a pretty comfortable environment. Maybe not for them. I try and make it comfortable. They're like, I have all these questions, but so many times it's conversations in passing. People that maybe we're just trying to plant a seed when we can. It's not always going to be this huge ordeal. I had a brother in Christ tell me that he wasn't good at talking with others. And I called him out on it, and I was like, I'm not buying that for 1 second. Because this guy was the most obnoxious Florida Gators fan you've ever met. He could tell you every recruit that they had coming in for the next season, and if someone even joked about how, like, you know, Alabama's the best team in the SEC, he would, like, roll up his sleeves and be like, let's talk about that. You know, like, he was great at talking with others. He could reason with them about Florida Gators football and basketball, or whatever sport it was. But when it came to the gospel, it's like, well, I'm not good at talking with them. I struggle with talking with people, and it's like, do you kind of see the disconnect there? See the problem with that? In Acts chapter 17 and verse 18, I want you to notice something in what we read earlier. That the people are shaming the Apostle Paul. They're trying to kind of break him down. I think Jacob mentioned this earlier, that, you know, in a culture of philosophy, but also debate, like how you presented yourself as a public speaker mattered. And so they have like these derogatory terms that they're throwing at him. Like, what does this babbler wish to say? Or he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities. That idea of being a babbler in the Greek, it originally means one who is a seed speaker. Seed speaker. And you might say that's kind of really weird. But the image is a bird picking off seeds or scraps off the ground. And so it's basically a way of saying, like, you're terrible at public speaking. Like, you can't put full thoughts together. Like, you're picking up thoughts here and there, but the logic, the flow, it just doesn't reach the intended result that you had. And so they're kind of like, you know, as the kids say today, like throwing shade on him, right? He's up here preaching, doing all these things. And he, like, you are an incompetent teacher. And does that stop him? No. I think I'm afraid too many times when it comes to, like, we can see that people are lost. We can have the right feeling, the right emotions stirred within us. And so we go out and we want to do something about it. We go and talk with someone. But the second that they push back on us, it's like we maybe feel justified. Like, I'm being persecuted for the cause of Christ. And it's like, I did my part. It's on them. And, like, we stop. That can't be the case. And I'm glad that, like, a lot of you are agreeing with me, because a lot of you are like, yeah, I get that. So what do you guys do? What's worked in maybe your life? Based off of what you see and what you felt, what have you been able to do in your life? Yes, sir.
I'm looking at all your points, like, what do I see, what do I feel, what do I do? And what I see is a lot of people that have their own ideas, and I feel frustrated because I feel like most people are not genuine about their thought processes or having a reasonable discussion. So what that makes me do is, when I'm in a discussion with somebody, I need to examine what they're saying, so that I can adequately use the truth to address what they're saying. The reason I bring that up, I've been talking to a buddy of mine that's follows Islam, and the discussions have been very helpful because he will question me on things that I never looked at. You know, like, he's wanting to ask me about the divinity of Jesus and stuff like that, and you know, you can't gloss over those things. That's a legitimate question, but he's genuine, you know. And if I'm not genuine also, if I'm not genuinely trying to find the truth, then it all kind of falls apart.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that, maybe if we're being honest, maybe we do that more times than we think. Like, we're not being that genuine, and so it's like, well, they just weren't interested, you know, and we kind of move on. And I think that's one of the things I struggle with the most is, like, when is it time to move on? Like, to dust off, the sandals and move on. That's a really hard. Ryan and I talked briefly about that, like every evangelist's like greatest struggle. Because out in Utah, I feel like a lot of people that are LDS will never say no to a study. And so I found that my plate I could have like 8 studies a day, every day for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean they'd be very effective and that their hearts would be receptive. And I'm not trying to be the judge of that. So that's where a lot of like wisdom and prudence is required, but also being genuine with those conversations. Something that I encourage a lot of our members out in Utah to do, we do these evangelism workshops out there where we meet once a month and we get everyone together and we kind of talk about the LDS faith, maybe like a specific aspect and how we can use some talking points to create some conversation and kind of build off of that. But something that I've learned is you can have all the evangelism shops in the world, but that doesn't mean we're going to actually follow through with it. And so I've encouraged them to be like, you have to find something that you are knowledgeable of, that you are passionate of, and something that you are confident in that you can go and share with other people. Because more times than not, we say things like, I don't exactly know the right thing to say. I'm not exactly sure what to do. We need to find something, whether it's like material that I'm sure you guys can talk with Ryan. He will gladly equip you and help you out with this. But what we need to be serious about growing and sowing seed for the kingdom of the Lord. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave you with this morning is, well, what do you say? Whoops. What do you say? There's a lot of ways that you could approach different people depending on where they're at and their walk and kind of their spiritual journey. But I think a good starting place for us, and maybe you're like, I'm not sure what to do. If I only get like one chance, like sit down and talk with someone about the gospel, I'd play like rock, paper, scissors with myself. Like Ephesians 2, Acts 17, like which one am I going to use? Like those are probably 2 of the places that I like to go to the most. And so I'll put this up here. I know that may be a little small for you to read, and so I can like send you a text of this. But in Acts 17, we didn't really get down to this part. This is meant to be more like a 2-part sermon, so sorry, you just get part 1. We get Paul's sermon when he's finally able to present on Mars Hill. And he really addresses like 4 questions that I would argue everybody's asking or has asked at some point in their life. Like, who is God? What is mankind? What is a man? What is our purpose? And where are we going? And in a matter of less than 10 verses, he addresses those in pretty impactful ways. And so that has been like a helpful, I even keep like the color-coded version in the back of my Bible. So when I'm studying with someone, it's like quick, easy to identify, like, well, what about this verse? And that has been like such a good jumping off place to kind of identify where are they at, what are they struggling with. And so that has been definitely a very useful text and kind of a tool that we've been using out in Utah. And so I know it's 9:44, so we're gonna wrap up here. But I would just encourage you guys, and we're gonna talk more about this in the lesson here in just a minute, the sermon, to really maybe examine our hearts and our lives about where we live, the people that we interact with, the people that we engage with, and what we can be doing to be more intentional. That yes, there are going to be opportunities that just come up, right? That you happen to come across someone, a word is said, and it's like, hey, do you want to study? You want to grab coffee? But maybe there's people in our lives, maybe it's family, that we need to be more intentional about reaching out to, about trying to seek and save those who are lost. Because Luke 19 and verse 10, that's what Jesus came to do. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. And so if I want to be a follower of Jesus, shouldn't I follow along with his mission? I would say yes. And so I appreciate your guys' conversation, your comments that you were able to add to our study this morning. Look forward to kind of continuing this idea in maybe a different direction in our sermon this morning. But thank you very much.